Dr. Welcher, could you take us to slide 30? Could you zoom in a little bit on the right photograph and the text under the right? Okay. You were explaining to us the time relevance of 12:23:38. And could you tell us again, remind us, what is 12:23:38 referring to?
The 12:23:38 is syncing the Techstream time to real world time. So we know how long the Techstream is on, we know when the vehicle was turned on, so we're adding those two together. So if you add the 12:12:36 to, for example, 11 minutes, 2.8 seconds, for when the end of the trigger is, that gives you 12:23:38. So the end of the trigger in real world time, no longer in the running clock, is now 12:23:38.
Based on the infotainment clock?
Based on the infotainment clock.
And that's from the Lexus?
From the Lexus.
Your Honor.
Sustained.
And where's that from?
The Lexus.
Thank you. The 12:23:58 number, what's the significance of that?
So that is Mr. Keefe's cell phone data at point 154. Again, from the original data we had just at 154 and 155 and not the in-between points. So,
And at the bottom in parentheses, explain to us what that means.
sure, if you look at where the Techstream math works out to be, 12:23:38.8, and compare that to 12:23:58, the difference between those two is 19.2 seconds.
The difference between which clocks?
Between what the Techstream infotainment system would show compared to what point 154 on Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone is.
And based on new data, do you now have information about what the variance, the differences between the clock on the Lexus infotainment and the clock on Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone?
Yes.
And what is that?
Objection, Your Honor.
Going to allow that.
You need to advance the Techstream clock 21 to 29 seconds.
You need to advance it 21 to 29 seconds for why? Why do you need to do that?
Because the cell phone is ahead 21 to 29 seconds.
After you advance the Techstream ahead 21 to 29 seconds, can you then compare the information, the time that's coming from the infotainment system Lexus to Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone from his iPhone?
Correct. That's what you need to have an apples to apples comparison. You need to get them on the same time clock.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You can proceed.
So I think we left off here. So that's 1162-1. So what we have is we have the cell phone data, the original cell phone data on the right-hand side. And then from that Techstream data, we have whether it's going forward, we have the speeds, and we have the steering angles. So from that information, we ran a simulation to show you what the Techstream data means. This is what the 10 seconds of data is. And again, just because the simulation stopped, that's just where the Techstream data ends. Again, as we showed you earlier, the car's still moving. That's just the last data point we have. So what that Techstream data shows is matching a 3-point turn on that Cedar Crest Street. So we have the vehicle motion, the timing data consistent with the interview statements about making a turn, 3-point turn.
Can you take us back to the data chart and show the 2 points that you just mentioned, the turning, where's that reflected in the data?
Sure, so you can see
And you'll have to enlarge that, I'm sorry, Doctor.
column N, that's the shift position. So that's looking, we start off going forward right here. And you can see at the start of the simulation, we're going about 9.94 miles an hour. And then as you start a three-point turn, you generally start, in this case, if you're going to the left, with the left turn. You're welcome. So you can see we have this steering angle here, then the transmission. So again, we have the brake application. So you're coming in, but you're slowing down, and you get down to a speed of approximately 0. 0, shift into reverse, back up, and then start to turn the other direction as you're backing up. So again, you want the rear to go to the right, you turn the steering wheel to the right, right is negative, and then as you start to pull around and pull forward, you turn back to correct to the steering, and so that's what this shows. So again, if you put it all into a simulation program, the speeds, the shifting, the distance, keep in mind we only have that 10-second window of data, and the steering angle for that Lexus, that's what it indicates.
Can you enlarge the photograph on the right with the data points and explain to us the significance of that?
Sure. So again, what we're trying to do is we have the infotainment, we have a Techstream. We're now trying to see how that correlates to Mr. O'Keefe's cell phone. So we had originally very coarse data points, 154 and 155. There's additional data points between here. So we're looking at how well does our predicted time compare to those two. So with the cell phone correction, you end up with the Techstream data at 12:23:59 to 12:24:07. So that's actually right in between these two data points. And so we know 154 was closest, but it's on the right-hand side of the road. 155 is when it's turned around and heading back in the southerly direction. So the cell phone data corroborates the Techstream timing data in conjunction with the infotainment system data.
Thank you. Please continue.
Okay, so we talked about 1162-1. That's the first trigger on the Techstream. So we're going to go to 1162-2. So I've highlighted that in yellow. So we're now talking about the second trigger. So this is on the same ignition cycle. It's on ignition cycle 1162. We have that same continuous running clock, but we've now synced it to real world clocks. So instead of the running clock, we now have some information on the real world clock. So at this time, we know the ignition has been on for 19 minutes and 2 seconds. So at the trigger, 19 minutes and 2 seconds. And again, we have 5 seconds either side of that. So between 18 minutes, 57.6 seconds to 19 minutes, 7.5 seconds.
Could you enlarge that, please?
Which part?
That part where your arrow is. You were speaking about the clock. Could you explain that so the jury can see?
Sure. So again, this is continuous from when the time comes on. I just converted it to minutes and seconds here, so you can see how long it's been on. This is the mileage. These are the speeds over here. And this is some information on how far it traveled. And we have the plus minus on the steering. That gives us some information on the steering. Really, there's very little steering going on at this point. Slight leftward steer.
Dr. Welcher, did you determine how long after the first trigger, that three-point turn, that this second trigger occurred?
Yes. Three-point turn occurred about 8 minutes after.
You said the three-point turn occurred
I'm
after...
sorry, this event, I misspoke. 11.2 occurred about 8 minutes after.
After the 3-point turn.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Can you walk us through this data?
Sure. Okay. So we have the accelerometer data here. I've highlighted a shift from drive to neutral to reverse.
I'm sorry,
Again-
you're going to need to zoom that in so we can see it.
Absolutely. We have information on the brake switch, brake oil pressure. We have the acceleration data here. And then from that information and using the acceleration data, calculating the speed at which it's backing up. The reason we have slightly different calculations here is we have some evidence that the wheel's slipping on the ground. So we need to use the accelerometer because the wheel speed is simply telling you the speed of the wheel. It's like if you're stationary burning rubber, the speedometer reads a certain speed, but you're not going anywhere. But the accelerometer tells you how much the vehicle's moving. So from all that information, we get information on how far the vehicle's traveled. We've done it in terms of total travel distance. We've done it relative to the start position.
I'm going to ask you to start on the columns on the left and take us through the information that you have regarding this second triggering event. So if you can scroll all the way to the left.
All the way to the left?
Yep. Okay. So the first column regarding time, could you remind us again what that is?
So again, that's the continuous running clock.
And the second column in blue?
That's where I take that time and convert it to what we more commonly use, minutes and seconds.
And now we have a key cycle event different than the 3-point turn. What's the number?
So this is now 1162-2.
And
So again, it's technically in the system the same key cycle. I've called it 1162-2.
And the red number next to it to the right?
That's the mileage. So it's actually at the same mileage as 1162-1. So we know, obviously, they're within the same mile.
If you can scroll over a couple of columns. From your data, can you tell during that event how far the Lexus traveled during
Yes.
that event?
Yeah.
And how do you do that?
So we have accelerometer data. We have velocity data or speed data back here. I've corrected for what you see down here is, and I go through this on a later slide, but right here you can see a significant increase in RPMs, but yet the acceleration is dropping. So what that means is if your RPMs are going up and the speed's going up, that means you should be accelerating more. But what happens because the acceleration is dropping, that means what's actually happened is the wheel's slipping. So what I've done is I've used the accelerometers data to calculate the speed once the vehicle is put into reverse. And once we know the speed, again, feet per second, we know every data point is half a second. So speed times time tells you how far you moved. Feet per second, feet divided by seconds times seconds gives you feet. That's how far you went. So you get how far you went in each interval, then you get the total distance traveled. And so this is relative to the start. So 0 is the start. The vehicle goes forward about 34 feet. Then you can see it basically stops in this area here, then begins to back up and ends up backing a total of 53 back from where it originally started. So if you add 53 to 34, you get 87. So the total motion, 34 forward, 53 back, the Lexus moved 87 feet total.
Dr. Welcher, when you say the Lexus moved 83 feet total, is that according to the data, or is that the entirety of the movement of that Lexus?
No, that's just from when the data starts to when the data ends. So if you look at when the data starts, you can see that the vehicle is actually going 13.67 miles an hour. When the data stops, the vehicle is still going 23 miles an hour. And you
From
can
this-
see,
I'm sorry.
you can still and see that it's still at 74% throttle. So, you know, this is 3/4 of full throttle in reverse.
So to start with the distance traveled, if you can go to the top, we see that the speed is 13.67. Is that where the data gets picked up?
That's where the first data point is. Again, the trigger is here. This is 5 seconds before the trigger.
Are you able to tell how fast or slow the vehicle is traveling before that data point of 5 seconds before the trigger?
No.
And likewise, on the bottom, the speed. At the end of the 10-second data points at 23.61, can you tell whether or not that speed stayed the same, increased, or decreased?
I mean, considering you're at 74% throttle, it likely increased. How much, I don't know. And you can see that up here, she's on the brake. Down here, she's not on the brake. And so she's not on the brake and at 74% throttle.
And what is the percentage of throttle that has to be initiated to cause a triggering event?
For a shift into rear and a rapid throttle application, it's 30%.
If you look at the next column over, if you can go to the top heading for the jury to see the engine RPM data, could you explain that?
Sure, again, that's the engine RPMs. And so, as I mentioned, you have this jump in engine RPMs and a very dramatic jump in the reported speed of the vehicle. But when you look at the acceleration is actually dropping. So again, that's a telltale sign that the tire's spinning because the vehicle's not being accelerated. And so I've used the accelerometer data. Again, if you just, a process called integration, you integrate the accelerometer data, it will give you the velocity. So what I've done is, it's called piecewise integration to get the speed data that takes into account the tire slippage, and from there calculated the speed or the position at each interval going across the top here.
If I could stop you at your column that says JBW speed at each time step.
Yep.
If you go to the bottom, please. So does your data indicate that the speed is changing at the end of this 10-second event?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Is the speed changing at the end of this event?
Yes.
How so?
Well, again, you can see it's increased about 2.7 miles per hour. And again, we know from what I already stated that that last time step, you're still at 74% throttle and you have 0 brake application.
Is it possible from the data to tell how far the Lexus went forward before it went in reverse in total as far as feet?
Not in total, no. We just have this 10-second window. I can tell you what it did during this 10-second window.
Is it possible to tell how far it continued after the data?
No.
The shift position changes from 1 to 0 to 2. Can you again explain to us what that means?
Sure, 1 is drive, 0 is neutral, 2 is reverse. And then brake switch status, again, a 1 is you're on the brake pedal, enough to activate the brake lights. 0 is you're off the brake pedal.
Each one of those indicators, 1, 0, 2, how much time is for each of those?
0.5 seconds.
So can you tell how long the Lexus was in neutral for?
So again, it only occurs at one time step. And again, there's a little timing issue, like we only have data every half second. You don't know exactly where in that time it was.
Okay, you can continue, Dr. Welcher.
Next slide or continue on this slide?
Unless there's something else you want to point out to the jury on this slide. You can
No, I'm
move to
good.
the next.
So similarly, using this information to then try to tie it back to the cell phone data to make sure we have the real-time information. Again, this was written back in January before I got the additional information. So what you can see is, I'll zoom in. Again, we're now talking about trigger 1162.2. We know that that's 18 minutes that the vehicle has been on, 18 minutes, 57 seconds, 19 minutes, 2 seconds. This is the range. Again, the plus or minus 5 seconds. The 19 minutes, 2 seconds is when the trigger occurred. Infotainment system, adding those two together, 12:36, plus the 19:7.5 indicates the end of 1162-2 is at 12:31:43.
That 12:31:43, is it based on the Lexus clock from the infotainment system?
It is. It would need to be corrected to the O'Keefe cell phone data.
And when you reconcile that variance of 21:29 seconds, what is the time?
You end up with 12:32:04. So if you simply take this and add 21 seconds to it and add 29 seconds to it, so you get between 12:32:04 and 12:32:12.
When you reconcile the two clocks and you have that range of 12:32:04 to 12:32:14,
12:32:12.
I'm sorry, 12:32:12, does that simply accommodate the window of data, but not before and after?
Correct. So, again, even on John's O'Keefe cell phone, even within his cell phone, there's somewhere between 21 to 29 seconds difference on his cell phone. So even that one piece of instrumentation has some variance to it. So we know it's between 21 to 29 seconds at this approximate time. So this is taking into account that variance.
So the only time window that you have is based on the data, and that's reflected in the 12:32:04 to 12:32:12?
Sustained.
Is there any other window you can accommodate with the data you have other than that 10-second window?
Yes.
What's that?
So I was given information about a final lock event on the phone.
Let's stick with this window if we can.
Okay.
Since you only have 10 seconds of data, is it possible from the Lexus clock data to have a larger window than this 10-second window?
No, the Techstream will only give you a 10-second window,
Okay.
but it doesn't tell the whole story because the vehicle's still moving.
Understood. Okay, continue, please.
So I have this other event, a lock event, and the information I was given that at 12, it's 12:32:09. And so we have the Techstream data ending at somewhere between 12:32:04 and 12:32:12, which puts this number right in the middle of that, more or less.
Continue.
Is this a good place to take a luncheon break?
Certainly, Your Honor.
Okay, so why don't we do that, Juror? So